What do I have to do to marry you human alien woman liked human man very much? Jack had always been a man of logic, a scientist who believed that the universe worked in patterns and equations. He never really understood the mysteries of life or the wonders beyond the human experience, at least not in the way others did. But everything changed the moment he was selected for a mission that no one could have predicted. It started like any other day at the research facility. Jack had spent countless hours reviewing his data, running calculations on the new quantum physics theories he was working on. Yet he had no idea that today would be different, that today would mark the beginning of something extraordinary. The message had arrived, delivered through a secure, encrypted channel that Jack only used for the most classified of communications. When he opened it, he was greeted with a brief but puzzling instruction. Prepare for first contact. Meeting at Sector 7, 10 a.m. tomorrow. First contact. The words hit him hard. Humans had been working on space exploration for centuries, but no one had ever expected to actually meet intelligent life beyond Earth. He had read the reports, seen the documentaries, but to be chosen for something like this, it was surreal. The next morning, Jack found himself at the facility, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what to expect. He had no special training for this kind of event. He was just a scientist, a man who had spent his life studying the physical world and unlocking its secrets. Yet here he was, about to meet a species from another world. As he entered the briefing room, Jack felt the air shift. He could sense it, a strange energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The room was filled with officials, military personnel, and scientists from different sectors, all gathered in anticipation. And then, at the front of the room, there was her presence. Lyra was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. She was tall, with skin that shimmered in a way that defied human understanding, almost as if she were made of stardust. Her eyes were large, an unnatural shade of violet, and her face held an expression of calm intelligence. She wore a sleek, silvery suit that seemed to mold to her body with precision, reflecting the soft glow of the room's artificial lights. Her voice when she spoke was smooth and melodic, with an accent that made her words sound like music, even though Jack couldn't understand the language at first. But somehow it didn't matter. There was something in the way she looked at him, something that said she was waiting for him to understand. "We are the Xanthari," she said, her voice calm and composed. "We have been observing your world for some time. It is an honor to finally make contact with your species." Jack stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what was happening. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only the woman before him, her presence both overwhelming and strangely comforting. He was supposed to say something, anything, but all he could do was nod. What did one say when faced with something so monumental? Lyra didn't seem bothered by his silence. She simply smiled, and it wasn't the kind of smile Jack expected. It wasn't cold or distant, as he might have imagined from an alien diplomat. It was warm, understanding. As if she had already seen through the barriers of language of species and knew exactly who he was. "Your species has much potential," she continued. "We are here to help, to guide, but there is much for you to learn and much for you to teach us." Jack was still processing her words when the meeting started. It wasn't long before he realized the gravity of what was at stake. The Xanthari weren't just here to observe. They were here for something much bigger, something that could change the course of human history forever. They needed Earth's cooperation in a universal peace initiative, and Jack was one of the few humans who had been selected to participate in these talks. It was an honor, yes, but it also brought with it immense responsibility. Over the next few days, Jack found himself working closely with Lyra and other members of her team. They spent long hours discussing their respective civilizations, the technological marvels the Xanthari had achieved, and the possibilities of what could happen if humans and Xanthari collaborated. Jack couldn't help but be fascinated. The more he learned, the more he realized how little humanity truly knew about the vastness of the universe. As the days passed, Jack found himself spending more and more time with Lyra. She was always calm, always composed, but there was a fire in her eyes, something that hinted at emotions beneath the surface. She didn't say much about her personal life, but Jack could tell that she was unlike anyone he had ever met. She wasn't just an alien diplomat. She was a thinker, a philosopher, and her ideas about humanity, about Earth, were unlike anything Jack had ever heard before. It was on the fourth day, during a long break from their negotiations, that Jack and Lyra found themselves alone in one of the facility's observation rooms. The large glass windows offered a breathtaking view of the stars, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. Jack stood there, looking out at the endless void, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could hear the faint hum of the building's systems and feel the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat, but in that moment, everything else seemed distant. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Do you ever wonder, Jack, what it would be like to see the universe through different eyes?" He turned to look at her, confused by the question. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight. "As a human, you see things in a certain way, but what if there's more to it? More than what you've been taught, more than your senses allow you to understand?" Jack felt a stirring in his chest. There was something in her words that resonated with him, something that made him question everything he had ever believed. He had spent his life searching for answers, for patterns, for explanations. But now, standing next to this alien woman who seemed to hold the keys to the universe itself, he realized how small his world truly was. "I've always believed that the universe is full of patterns," Jack said slowly. "But maybe it's more about connections than patterns. More about understanding than explaining." Lyra nodded, her smile deepening. "Perhaps, but there's one thing I know for sure, Jack. We are not so different. Humans and Xanthari, we are not that far apart." Jack looked at her, his curiosity growing with each passing moment. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about her, a connection, a bond, that felt undeniable. It wasn't just their shared mission that drew him to her, it was something deeper, something that neither species had fully understood yet. As the days went on, Jack and Lyra continued to work together. Their bond grew stronger, but neither of them spoke of it. There were too many questions, too many uncertainties, and yet the spark between them was undeniable. One evening, after another long day of discussions, Jack found himself unable to sleep. He stood by the window in his quarters, gazing out at the stars. His thoughts kept returning to Lyra. He had never been one for emotional connections, but there was something about her that made him want to understand her, to learn from her, to see the universe through her eyes. It was then that he realized this wasn't just about the mission. This wasn't just about intergalactic peace. It was about something more, something he couldn't put into words, something that would change the course of his life forever. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He had already taken the first step into a much larger world, a world that held not just the mysteries of the universe, but the possibility of something he had never imagined before. As the days passed, Jack found himself immersed deeper and deeper in his work with the Xanthari. He had never imagined that such a vast universe existed, one filled with secrets, wonders, and mysteries beyond human comprehension. He had expected the alien species to be distant and difficult to relate to, but Lyra had proven him wrong. She was intelligent, compassionate, and unlike anyone he had ever met. But Jack didn't want to acknowledge what was slowly building between them. He couldn't, not yet. The days were long, filled with talks and research, and Jack did his best to focus on the mission, pushing aside the strange feelings that had begun to surface. Lyra, on the other hand, seemed unaffected by their growing connection. At least, she made no indication of it. She remained professional, keeping her thoughts and emotions locked behind the veil of her alien composure. But Jack noticed the small things, the way her eyes softened when they made eye contact, the slight warmth in her voice when they spoke. It was subtle, but it was there. During one of their many briefings, the Xanthari delegation introduced Jack to their culture in more detail. He learned that they were an ancient species, one that had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Their advanced technology allowed them to travel across galaxies, but it wasn't just their tech that set them apart, it was their way of thinking. The Xanthari believed in a philosophy of unity and balance. They viewed all beings as part of a larger cosmic order, interconnected in ways that humanity could hardly begin to understand. Lyra spoke passionately about her people's belief in harmony with the universe. "We do not act on impulse," she explained to Jack one evening. "We act on understanding. We choose peace because it is the only path to true progress." Jack listened intently, fascinated by her words. He had always believed that human progress depended on action, on striving to break boundaries. But Lyra's words made him question everything. Maybe there was more to peace than he had realized. Maybe humanity had been rushing headlong into its future without truly understanding the universe they inhabited. The next few days were filled with exchanges. Jack and Lyra spent hours discussing their different views, finding similarities in their philosophies despite their vastly different ways of life. At first, Jack had struggled to understand Lyra's way of thinking. It seemed too calm, too measured. But as the days passed, he began to see the wisdom in her words. She was right in many ways. Humanity rushed into the unknown without taking the time to fully appreciate its place in the vast expanse of the cosmos. One evening, as they were walking through the facility's garden, Jack couldn't help but feel the quiet pull between them. It was a peaceful place, surrounded by the quiet hum of the facility's systems and the soft rustling of leaves in the artificial breeze. Jack had always loved nature, even the controlled kind, and this garden was one of the few places where he could momentarily escape from the heavy weight of the mission. "Do you miss your home?" Jack asked, his voice soft, hesitant. Lyra's expression softened as she looked up at the stars above. "In a way, I do. I miss the tranquility of my home planet, but my duty is here now. I serve the greater good of my people." Her answer was expected, yet it felt incomplete. Jack had seen her passion for her people, her belief in their cause, but there was something in the way she said those words that made him wonder if she truly felt fulfilled. He wanted to ask more, to know more about her, but he knew it wasn't the time. She had built a life of duty and responsibility, and asking her about her personal desires felt like overstepping. The conversation drifted from their personal lives to the more technical aspects of their work. Jack could tell that Lyra appreciated the quiet, the way their discussions would meander slowly, as if they were both searching for deeper truths in each other's words. It was in these moments that Jack began to understand her. She wasn't just an alien diplomat. She was someone who was capable of extraordinary depth, someone who thought beyond the immediate to the long-term consequences of every decision. One afternoon, Jack was sitting at his desk in the research lab, reviewing data from the latest round of experiments. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the machines and the occasional beeping of a console. He had just finished inputting the results when he saw a small light flash on his communicator. It was a message from Lyra. He clicked the message open and read it quickly. "I have prepared a special demonstration for you. Meet me at the observatory in 30 minutes. There is something I want you to see." Curiosity piqued, Jack stood up and made his way to the observatory. He didn't know what Lyra had in mind, but he couldn't deny the feeling that whatever it was important. As he arrived, he found Lyra standing by a large window, her gaze fixed on the stars. There was a slight tension in her posture, as if she were waiting for something. "You wanted to show me something?" Jack asked, his voice breaking the silence. Lyra turned to face him, her violet eyes locking onto his. "Yes, but it is not what you might expect. I want you to understand our perspective more deeply, Jack. The Xanthari have seen the consequences of conflict, of war. We have watched entire civilizations fall because they refuse to see the bigger picture. I want you to see this." She gestured to the window, and Jack moved closer. Outside, a holographic projection appeared in the air. It was a map of the galaxy, dotted with various stars and planets. Lyra touched a control on the side of the window, and the map zoomed in, highlighting a distant star system. "This is the Illyrian system," Lyra explained. "It was once a thriving civilization, much like your own. But they were too focused on their own growth, too driven by their desire for power. They destroyed themselves, and now nothing remains of their home." Jack stared at the projection, the weight of her words sinking in. The system was now a barren wasteland, its planets cracked and lifeless. There was no sign of life, no evidence of the once thriving civilizations that had existed there. "Do you see?" Lyra asked softly. "This is what happens when progress is pursued without understanding. We cannot let humanity follow the same path." Jack was silent for a long time. He had never seen anything like this before. The consequences of blind ambition, of unchecked progress, it was more than he could have ever imagined. He looked at Lyra, her face solemn as she waited for his reaction. "I understand," Jack said slowly. "But how do we prevent it? How do we ensure that humanity doesn't fall into the same trap?" Lyra smiled, a faint trace of relief in her eyes. "That, Jack, is what we are here to figure out, together." In the days that followed, Jack found himself thinking more and more about the implications of their work. He had never realized how much humanity's own progress could hurt others, could harm their planet, could lead them down a path they couldn't recover from. Lyra had shown him something that changed the way he saw the world. But as they continued to work together, Jack also began to see something else. There was more than just the mission, more than just the negotiation between their two species. There was Lyra, the woman who had shown him a new way of thinking, a new way of seeing the universe. And though he tried to push it aside, Jack couldn't help the growing feeling inside him. He was falling for her, and he didn't know what to do about it. The days that followed were a blur for Jack. The weight of the knowledge that Lyra had shared with him, the haunting image of the Illyrian system, its once thriving planets now lifeless, hung heavy in his mind. He couldn't shake it off. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about something bigger. Something that called out to him, like an unanswered question in the back of his mind. He had always believed that progress was the key to a better future, but now he wasn't so sure. Lyra had opened his eyes to the idea that unchecked progress could lead to destruction. Humanity had come so far in such a short time, but could they continue down this path without making the same mistakes? Was their rapid development going to lead to the same fate as the Illyrians? Jack didn't know the answer, but he knew that he had to find it. As he sat in his quarters, staring out at the stars, he heard a knock at the door. It was Lyra. She had come to speak with him again, but this time there was something different about her. Her usual calm composure was gone, replaced by an intensity that Jack had never seen before. "Jack," she said, her voice urgent, "we need to talk." Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped into the room, her violet eyes fixed on him. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, something that made Jack's heart race. She wasn't just here to discuss the mission. This was something personal. "What is it?" Jack asked, his voice tense. Lyra took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the consequences of progress, and I've been thinking about the path that humanity is on. I don't think we have much time." Jack was silent for a moment, processing her words. "What do you mean? Are the negotiations at risk?" Lyra shook her head, her expression grave. "No, the negotiations are fine, but there are forces at play, forces that are bigger than the two of us. There are factions within the Scifi that don't believe in peace, Jack. They don't believe that humans should be part of the greater galactic order, and they are moving in ways that we can't predict." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "Are they planning something?" Lyra nodded. "They have a plan. And if we don't act quickly, we might lose everything. Our mission, our partnership, everything." Jack's mind was racing. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. He had known that intergalactic peace was fragile, but to hear that Lyra's own people, her own species, might not share her vision of unity was a shock. "Is there anything we can do?" Jack asked, his voice filled with determination. Lyra stepped closer, her gaze intense. "We can stop them, but it won't be easy. We will have to make difficult choices, choices that may risk everything." Jack nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of her words. "I'm in," he said firmly. "We have to do what it takes." For a moment, there was silence between them. Lyra's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch Jack's arm. The simple touch sent a surge of warmth through him. There was something in her eyes now, something deeper than the duty they both shared. Jack couldn't ignore it any longer. He had felt it for days, the growing pull between them, but now it felt impossible to deny. Lyra pulled her hand back quickly, as if she had just realized the closeness between them. She stepped back, her composure returning, but the look in her eyes lingered. "We need to focus," she said quietly. "This isn't the time for distractions." Jack nodded, forcing himself to push aside the feelings that were rising within him. There would be time for that later. Right now, they had a mission to complete, and it was a dangerous one. The thought of losing everything, the chance at peace, the chance to work with Lyra, was enough to focus his mind. They spent the next few days preparing. Jack and Lyra worked together, discussing their next moves, analyzing the data they had, and uncovering the factions within the Scifi that were working against them. The more they dug, the clearer it became that the Scifi's peaceful front was only one side of the story. There were many within their society who didn't want to see humans integrated into the galactic order. They saw humanity's rapid growth as a threat. They didn't trust humans, and they were willing to do anything to prevent a union. Lyra was the key. She was one of the few Scifi with enough influence to change the course of their people's future. But even her power wasn't enough to guarantee success. The factions against them were powerful, and they were not afraid to use force to get what they wanted. Jack couldn't help but admire Lyra's strength. She was fearless, willing to stand up against her own people for the greater good. It made him admire her even more. But at the same time, it terrified him. He knew that the stakes were too high, that they were both walking a dangerous line. Late one night, as they were poring over their strategy, Jack noticed something in Lyra's eyes that he hadn't seen before. It was vulnerability. For the first time since their meeting, she wasn't the composed diplomat, the strong leader. She was just a woman who had been forced to choose between her duty to her people and her belief in something greater. And in that moment, Jack saw her in a way he never had before. She was no longer just an alien, a stranger from another world. She was someone he could connect with, someone he could care about. "Lyra," Jack said quietly, breaking the silence, "I know this is difficult, but we can do this, together." She looked at him, her eyes softening, and for a moment Jack saw a flicker of something, a hint of the feelings that had been building between them. "I hope you're right," she whispered. "But if we fail, everything will be lost, and I can't bear that thought." The weight of her words hung in the air, but there was something else there now, something that wasn't there before. Jack could feel the tension between them, the unspoken connection that neither of them could ignore. The next day, they set their plan into motion. Lyra used her influence to rally those Xanthari who still believed in peace, while Jack worked to gather support from the human delegation. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they had no choice. The factions against them were already moving, and time was running out. As the negotiations reached their peak, Jack and Lyra found themselves standing side by side, facing down the very factions that had once seemed unbeatable. They were determined to succeed, but in the back of Jack's mind there was a growing realization that the stakes were higher than just the future of their people. It was about something deeper now, something personal. When the time came, they would have to make a choice. And Jack wasn't sure if he was ready for it. The days leading up to the final phase of the peace negotiations were tense. Jack and Lyra had done everything they could. They had rallied support, convinced some of the more moderate factions among the Xanthari, and even managed to sway a few influential humans who were initially skeptical of the Xanthari's true intentions. But there was still a lingering fear that it wouldn't be enough. They were up against a well-organized force that had been operating in the shadows for far longer than anyone had realized. Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Every decision they made felt like a step into the unknown. The stakes were higher than he could have imagined when he first joined this mission. And through it all, Lyra remained calm, composed, and focused. But Jack knew her better now. He knew that beneath her unwavering exterior, there was a quiet storm of doubt just like his own. They had spent countless hours poring over strategies, running simulations, and preparing for every possible outcome. But no matter how much they planned, no matter how many times they rehearsed their speeches and negotiations, the uncertainty remained. What if they failed? What if the factions within the Xanthari were too powerful to stop? Late one night, as they prepared for the final meeting, Jack found himself alone in the observation room once again. He stared out at the stars, his thoughts swirling. The vastness of space had always made him feel small, but now, with everything at stake, it felt even more overwhelming. How had he gotten here? How had a simple scientist like him become embroiled in something so massive? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound behind him. He turned to see Lyra standing in the doorway. She looked exhausted, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a weariness Jack had never seen before. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "I was just thinking," Jack said quietly, "about everything. About what comes next." Lyra stepped into the room, her eyes softening as she approached him. "I know," she said. "We've done everything we can. The rest is out of our hands." Jack nodded, but the uncertainty lingered in the air between them. He wanted to say more, to reach out to her, but he knew that now wasn't the time. They had too much to lose. "It's not just about the peace anymore," Jack said slowly. "It's about us, isn't it? The way we've been working together, the way we've connected." "I can't ignore it anymore, Lyra." Lyra's gaze faltered for a moment, and for the first time since they had met, she seemed unsure. Her expression softened, and Jack could see the vulnerability that she had been hiding all along. The same vulnerability he had felt creeping into his own heart. "I've been trying not to think about it," Lyra admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "There's so much at stake, but I can't deny it either. There's something between us, something I never expected." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. Jack felt a surge of relief wash over him. He wasn't alone in this. Lyra felt the same pull, the same connection. It wasn't just about their work anymore. It was about something more. But we can't let it distract us, Lyra continued, her voice firm once again. Our mission, our people, they all come first. We can't afford to be distracted now. Jack nodded. He knew she was right. There was no room for weakness, no room for personal desires. They had a duty, a responsibility to see this through, but that didn't mean he could simply shut off what he felt. I know, he said, his voice steady, but I won't lie to myself anymore. We have to face whatever comes next together. Lyra didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, her expression a mix of conflict and understanding. Finally, she stepped closer to him, her gaze never leaving his. Together, she echoed softly. The moment lingered, suspended between them. Neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. The weight of everything they had been through, everything they had worked for, was suddenly all too real. The future of their species, the fate of their alliance, all of it rested on their shoulders. But in that moment, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of clarity. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The next morning, they met with the rest of the delegation. The final meeting was upon them, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. Lyra stood at the head of the room, her usual commanding presence in place, while Jack sat beside her, his thoughts more focused than they had been in days. The factions within the Scifi were ready to make their move. The negotiations were about to begin, and Jack knew that this was the moment where everything would be decided. They began the discussions with the usual formalities, each side presenting their case for peace, for cooperation, for a future together. The human delegation was cautious but hopeful, while the Scifi moderates spoke passionately about the need for unity. But Jack could feel the undercurrent of hostility from the opposing factions, those who were still intent on keeping humanity at bay. They were subtle, careful in their words, but Jack knew what they were trying to do. They wanted to sabotage the negotiations, to drive a wedge between the two species before they could unite. Lyra handled the situation with her usual calm, her words measured and precise. She countered every accusation, every argument with logic and reason. But Jack could see the strain in her eyes, the pressure mounting as the factions pushed harder, their resistance growing more vocal with each passing minute. At one point, a voice from the back of the room interrupted the proceedings. It was one of the more radical members of the Scifi delegation, someone who had been openly critical of humanity's involvement in the galactic order. We cannot allow these humans to dictate our future, the voice said, sharp and accusatory. They are reckless, impulsive, we cannot trust them. Peace is a lie and we must stand firm. Lyra's gaze sharpened. She stepped forward, her voice calm but powerful. What you fail to see, she said, her words cutting through the tension in the room, is that we are not so different. We share the same fears, the same hopes. Humanity has the potential to be a force for good, but only if we choose to trust them. Only if we choose to believe in their future. The room fell silent. For a moment there was no movement, no sound. Jack could see the doubt in the eyes of some of the delegates, the fear that had been stoked by those who opposed peace. But then, slowly, the voices began to change. Some of the more moderate factions began to speak out, lending their support to Lyra's argument. The tide was turning. Jack felt a glimmer of hope. They might actually make it. They might succeed. But then, as the negotiations continued, there was a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The opposing factions were no longer trying to argue. Instead, they were positioning themselves for something much darker. Jack could sense it. Something was wrong. Lyra must have sensed it too. She turned to him, her face pale but determined. We need to move now, she whispered. This isn't just about peace anymore. They're planning something. Before Jack could respond, chaos erupted in the room. The radical faction had made their move, launching an attack that sent the room into a panic. Lyra and Jack were caught in the middle, forced to act quickly to protect the delegation and ensure that the peace talks didn't collapse completely. The final phase of their mission had begun, and there was no turning back. The chaos in the room was deafening. Screams, shouts, and the sound of chairs scraping across the floor filled the air as Jack and Lyra stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The peaceful negotiation had turned into a battlefield. Factions that had once hidden behind diplomatic words were now revealing their true intentions, and their actions were swift and ruthless. Jack's heart raced as he scanned the room. He could see the more radical members of the Xanthari delegation moving toward the exits, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and determination. It was clear now, this wasn't just about preventing peace anymore. They were planning to take matters into their own hands, using force to halt the integration of humanity into the galactic order. Lyra's face was a mask of concentration, her eyes sharp and focused despite the confusion around her. She knew that they had very little time to act. She turned to Jack, her voice barely audible over the noise. "We need to stop them now. If they escape, the consequences could be catastrophic." Jack nodded, his mind still racing. He had trained for situations like this, but nothing had ever felt this real. His body moved on instinct as he reached for the communicator on his belt. But before he could make contact with the human delegates, the sound of gunfire rang out. The shot came from the back of the room, and Jack spun around just in time to see one of the Xanthari radicals pointing a weapon toward the ceiling, as if to signal a warning. The shot had clearly been meant to intimidate, but it worked. Everyone in the room froze. The situation had escalated. This was no longer a negotiation, it was a hostage crisis. Lyra's expression didn't falter. She was already moving toward the center of the room, stepping carefully around overturned chairs and desperate groups of delegates who were trying to find cover. "Jack, stay close," she called, her voice steady and calm, even as the tension in the room reached a fever pitch. He followed her without hesitation, his eyes scanning the crowd. He had never seen Lyra so focused, so determined. She was a leader in this moment, and her confidence gave him the strength to move forward. They couldn't let the situation spiral out of control. If the radicals succeeded in their plan, everything they had worked for, the peace, the unity, the future of both their species, would be destroyed. As they reached the center of the room, Lyra turned to face him. "We have to make sure they don't get away with this. We need to lock down the exits and secure the room. If we can neutralize their leader, we'll have a chance to regain control." Jack's mind was working quickly. He knew that if they didn't act fast, the radicals would have the upper hand. But the room was crowded, and the people around them were panicked. He could see that some of the Xanthari diplomats who had once supported the peace talks were now backing away, clearly afraid of what was unfolding. There was no time to waste. "We need a distraction," Jack said. "Something to draw their attention." Lyra nodded. "I'll handle the leader, you take care of the others." Without waiting for a response, Lyra moved swiftly through the crowd, her eyes locked on the radical leader, who was still holding the weapon, trying to maintain control. Jack knew that she was prepared for this. She had always been calm under pressure, and if anyone could stop the situation from spiraling further, it was her. Jack turned his attention back to the room. There were still too many people, too many potential threats. His eyes landed on a group of humans who were huddled near the side of the room. They were clearly trying to figure out what to do, their faces a mix of confusion and fear. He couldn't leave them behind. "Everyone, stay down," Jack shouted, his voice carrying across the room. He moved toward the group, positioning himself between them and the radicals. He could see that the humans were starting to listen, but their fear was still palpable. They needed reassurance. "Lyra will handle this," Jack continued, his voice firm. "But we need to stay calm. This is our chance. We can't let them control the room." As Jack spoke, he noticed movement at the far side of the room. The radical leader was making his way toward the exit. He had to be stopped. Jack felt a surge of adrenaline as he moved toward the door, but before he could get any closer, Lyra made her move. In one fluid motion, she rushed toward the leader, her movements precise and purposeful. She didn't hesitate. She didn't show fear. She was a force, and in that moment she was the only thing standing between peace and chaos. With a quick, calculated move, Lyra disarmed the leader. He was caught off guard, his weapon falling to the ground with a loud clatter. The room fell silent, the tension broken by the sudden turn of events. Lyra stood over him, her eyes unwavering as she addressed the other radicals. "This ends now," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "We will not allow violence to undo everything we've worked for." The radicals hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do next. They had thought that their actions would break the will of the others, but Lyra had proven them wrong. She had shown them strength, not through force, but through conviction. "We're done," one of the radicals said quietly, his voice filled with defeat. Slowly, the others lowered their weapons, realizing that their plot had failed. Lyra turned to face Jack, a flicker of relief in her eyes. She walked toward him, her expression still serious, but there was a sense of triumph in her gaze. "We did it!" Jack couldn't help but feel a rush of gratitude for her. She had saved them, not just with her physical skills, but with her unshakable belief in what they were trying to achieve. It wasn't just about diplomacy. It was about trust, unity, and the will to make the world a better place, no matter the cost. But as the dust settled, Jack knew that the fight wasn't over. They had stopped the immediate threat, but the real challenge lay ahead. The radicals who had tried to destroy their efforts were only a symptom of a deeper problem. There were still people out there who didn't believe in the possibility of peace, but Jack wasn't going to let that stop him, not now. Lyra looked at him, her expression softening for the first time in hours. "We've come this far," she said quietly. "We can't give up now." Jack nodded, his heart swelling with determination. "No, we'll finish what we started." Together, they had faced the most difficult challenge of their lives, and they had emerged victorious. But the real work had only just begun. The future of both their species depended on the choices they made in the coming days, and Jack knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead was, he and Lyra would face it together. They had started a journey toward peace, and nothing, not even the darkest forces, would stop them now.